see that we have a lot of audience, and it looks like this topic is really in demand. Not only citizens of the city, but experts, Russian and international experts, are interested in this discussion. And today we're going to share the experience we've accumulated, and we are going to talk about the challenges for the future, those challenges which are connected with the renovation program. Let me introduce our speakers today. Sergei Levkin, head of the urban planning department in Moscow, CLP, Deputy Director of the Municipal Commission of Housing, Urban Development and Management, Shanghai, Marcus Appenzeller, Director and Partner, MLA Plus, Alexei Babashin, General Director, Crossed Concern, Sergei Kuznetsov, Chief Architect of Moscow, Pier Francesco Maran, Vice Mayor of Milano for Urban Planning, and Maxim Reshetnikov, the Governor of the Perm region, Russia. We also have experts who are sitting here near us, Alexei Lomakin and Anatoly Konstantinov, General Director of the Renovation Fund of Moscow, Ilya Kievsky, General Director, MPC, the development of the city. And I think that all the experts and all our colleagues are ready for this discussion. Everyone has 5 minutes for your presentation, and at the end of the discussion, we'll be able to answer the questions. First of all, I'd like to give the floor to Sergei Levkin, who is the head of the Department of Urban Development Policy of Moscow. Good day. That's great that this renovation project is in the spotlight. It was announced a couple of years ago at this urban forum. We have demonstrated that the new project, the district of the future. A year ago, we had the same round table here at this forum. We talked about the progress. It was the time when the project just started, and we heard a lot of different opinions. Opinions were not always very positive. Some of the remarks were rather negative. Today we are going to talk about the future of this project, and we are going to talk about the recent developments with this project. I will not speak too long, so that I'd like to get the questions, and I'd like to hear the opinion of my colleagues. Renovation of the city space, this is one of the key ways to improve the standard of living for Muscovites, because the life is transforming. We have new technologies, new approaches, and people have different expectations from the city, and the mayor of Moscow was talking a lot about it at the plenary session today. The renovation program is one of the unique opportunities for the city, really very unique, because almost 10% of the population will be affected. It's more than 350 apartments. As a result, we, of course, need to make sure that the project is efficient. We need to create healthy and new and unique city environment. When preparing for this forum, when preparing for the Urban Health Congress, we've done a research. We wanted to see the changes in the Moscow development. We wanted to see whether Moscow is actually showing good results in terms of urban health. We worked with some of the leading companies who can assess urban health. I'll give you an example of just one company. BREM is its name. It has 80 different indicators. All of them are related to the healthy living, streets and cities, environment-friendly houses. we assessed 2 planning projects, Metrogorodok and Ivanovskaya districts. We've compared indicators before and after the project. And we got the results, and I'm sure I can state that the quality of living, the health of living, for example, noise and some other indicators, have improved. It doubled. And it shows that our plans for the future are correct. And after we actually implement this project, we will be able to have much better indicators for the standards of living. Yes, there are critics, but still we cooperate, we engage with Muscovites, those who are affected and those who are not affected by this project. We used the active citizen application. We had a general meeting with Muscovites. If people didn't want, they could say no to this renovation project, and only 2 houses out of all the houses affected decided not to participate. We receive a lot of requests for citizens to be included in this project additionally. We also have a special civic staff established, and that's the place for communication with people. We visit apartments, we talk to the people directly. Besides, we have a special contact center, and there are 3 hotlines people can call there directly. On the first line, we get answers according to the scripts, and if the question is rather difficult, you go to the second or the third line you speak with an expert, and you can get very detailed answers to your questions. And this is a very unique program. Sergey, thank you very much. The civic staff receives a lot of questions, I can confirm that. And the quality, the content of question changes. Now, people mostly ask about the deadlines. They want to receive new housing as soon as possible. So they want to know exact dates for the changes they are going to undergo. And a lot of Muscovites who were not affected, they are interested in the future, and a lot of people really want to participate in this project. They want to get new housing. They want their old houses to be renovated. Is it possible to ask questions? Maybe journalists can ask Sergey some questions about this project. Give us your name and TASS agency. My name is Angelina. A lot of experts, international experts too, say that the construction industry is the driver for the city economy. Do you think that the renovation project can help the economy of Moscow somehow? Yes, this project will be a boost for the construction industry in Moscow. It will, according to the estimates that we had together with the economic bloc, and if you take into account all the multiplying effects, all the statistical data, they show that up to 16%, this is the level of contribution of the construction industry to the Moscow city budget. And of course, this project is going to be help the economy of Moscow. We need to boost the construction. And right now, with this project, we are building a lot, and we can implement this goal of boosting the construction. So, for example, in Sochi, there was a certain similar goal, but there were no good construction companies, and all the companies from all over Russia moved there to help and to start active construction processes. So right now, this renovation project is very good for the construction industry in general. More questions? Moscow agency. My name is Sergis. So you said that the goal of this project is to create the new city environment. Are there any other goals? Can you mention some of them? I think Sergei Olegovich, the chief architect of Moscow, is better suited to answer the question. Or is it better for me? Or do you want me to answer? Actually, I have the whole presentation dedicated to this topic, but and I will be able to answer you in full when they give me the floor. Some of the houses which are now under renovation were built in 1950s. What do you think is the lifespan of the new houses you are building now? More than 100 years. That's my personal opinion. A house is in a bad state not only because of its design. Sometimes it's outdated because of the new trends in the city, and if you compare your house with some new houses which were built for new generations, you can just feel that your house is simply, I would say, morally outdated, and it needs to be replaced. My question: what are the main technical indicators, economic indicators of the program, and are you going to change them in the future? Yes, they will be changed after we approve all the designs. We get the approval from the city of Moscow. Right now, we have 2.2 million square meters under construction. And of course, these numbers are going to be increased because the project is growing. We are going to have the second stage of this project, so the number of square meters under construction are going to double in the nearest future. Now I would like to give the floor to the next speaker, Markus Appenzeller, the Managing Director of MLA and Deputy of the Commission for City Infrastructure, and our expert from Shanghai. So you participated in redevelopment of the city in Shanghai. What can you tell us about communication between construction companies and city authorities? How can you compare this cooperation with situation in Moscow? I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me to this forum. In the morning today, I participated. I heard a very lively discussion. It was very interesting. And now I'd like to give you some update about the situation in Shanghai. Shanghai is a mega city. We have 24 million people. We have 600 million square meters of housing. Yes, there are houses of different types, not only residential buildings, of course. We have different models of renovation. And now I'd like to tell you about renovation processes we use. Until 2016, all the renovation projects, they envisaged the full demolition of houses, and after that we were building new houses in exchange.
Starting from 2016, Shanghai has come up with new concepts towards the new city and old buildings. Previously, we were considering full demolition of old buildings. Now we are more leaning towards preservation and renovation. Demolition is the last option. We have three basic models of renovation for old neighborhoods. The first model applies to buildings with a full set of functions, and in such case we do the outward appearance renovation, so while preserving the existing infrastructure. We can also put on AC units. We can add additional water discharge units, for example, add columns for charging stations, for e-vehicles. We hide the wires, aerial wires. So if we have good solid buildings, we preserve it. And the numerous buildings in Shanghai, which are 50 or 100 years old, a second model, which is applied to old housing stock with missing infrastructure. So we do redesign. For example, 100 years ago, this building was built 100 years ago, so it could have some public bathhouses or public communal kitchens. Of course, in that case, we do the redesign, and we have separate kitchens and bathrooms. They're old buildings that require a lot of efforts, but they're protected by law. And in such case, we face very strict requirements. We can play with we need to preserve the outward appearance to ensure that we preserve the historic look of the city, and we need to preserve the way of life of the people. And the third type is internal renovation. So the second question, the methods we're using, all of you know that Shanghai has a lot of special buildings, merging cultures of the East and the West. And so we have a lot of traditional dwellings of the common people, and we have architectural we have a broad range of architectural styles in Shanghai. If you've ever visited Shanghai, you know what I'm talking about. The uniqueness of Shanghai, peculiarity of Shanghai, and that makes Shanghai different from other cities in China. So most of the buildings are not more than 100 years old. This makes us different from other cities which date back to many centuries. It should be mentioned that most of these buildings are still occupied. They're not museums. They're still livable dwellings. People are still living there. And so there's a huge practical and historical importance attached to these buildings. So when we talk about the preservation of these buildings and their renovation, restoration, we should talk about improving living standards and quality of life of the people and preserving the historical value. We need to strike the right balance. It should be mentioned that requirements to the preservation of old buildings and oftentimes come into conflict with the attempts to improve living standards. We had some experiments before. A very successful model we used when we didn't change the outward appearance of buildings. We didn't use the uses of those buildings, but we improved the living environment. It's called Bugao Lane. So basically, we improve basic functions, enhance the living environment without changing the historical features of building complexes and changing previous residential characteristics. We improve sanitary infrastructure, we improve kitchens, we preserve historical appearance, we preserve its status as a dwelling, and we preserve its place in people's memories. This Bugao Lane experiment was a success, and we expanded it to other neighborhoods. For example, Changni neighborhood. Chang Lane, we carried out this renovation work to preserve the buildings. Chungyang Lane, for example, we've just finished this project. So we're maintaining and preserving historical appearance of the buildings. At the same time, we provide additional services inside the buildings, make sure that people have separate bathrooms, kitchens, and of course that improves their living standards. We've just completed this project. The second model is demolition and building from scratch. A lot of buildings built in the 50s for the working people, and of course its structure is completely destroyed. It required full restructuring. Some people were relocated within the same neighborhood, and the government is encouraging private companies to take part in such projects. For example, the examples of the redevelopment projects of 3 estates. Brand new neighborhoods were built. They have a good layout, higher level of amenities, and of course it improved living standards. And the third model that we use vis-a-vis special areas under protection. So some residents are relocated, and we have to rebuild the buildings, and we change the purpose of those buildings. For example, the neighborhood called Xintiandi, it used to be a residential area. After redevelopment, it became a commercial area. And at the reception, people who were at the reception said that they visited this area in Shanghai. So it used to be a residential area. It was redeveloped into a commercial estate, commercial area. So the original residents were relocated. We preserved the outward appearance of the buildings, but the inside, the layout, the public spaces, everything was restructured according to the commercial needs. Another project, Tianzifang, we relied on private investors. The government improved the infrastructure and attracted different shops, companies, cultural centers. And the upper floors are still livable. People live there. The ground floors are rented out for shops and stores. There's another very well-known set of historical buildings. We preserved the outward appearance. We relocated people. First, we relocated residents. We changed its purpose, changed the business model. I'm not going into details because we have a speaking time. I would just like to touch on the challenges we faced. Shanghai, in the course of our renovation works, there's still a lot of old neighborhoods that need to be renovated. There are lots of old lanes and streets that need to be renovated with very high density of people. Starting from 2017, furthermore, we've been facing new requirements. We used to call it demolition, preservation, and renovation. Now we're talking about preservation, then renovation. And essentially, now we have very few opportunities for demolition. So the priority list has changed. Preservation now is taking precedence over other methods. And now these historical lanes, all the squares, public squares, now they are under preservation mode. At the end of 2018, we have a lot of old housing stock, lacking sanitary infrastructure, but 3.5 million square meters. There are lots of difficulties associated with the renovation projects because an agreement must be first sought between city residents and city authorities, and everybody should agree on the method of renovation. Because previously, when we used demolish build model, it was easy. Now we are using new models, renovation models, and we must engage with the public at large. We must engage with private investors in order to get everybody's on the board. And the more we move into this, the further we move into this, the more challenges and difficulties we're seeing. We hope that in the next 5-year period, we'll be able to complete our renovation work in Shanghai. Thank you. Thank you. The experience of engagement between authorities and the public at large is an issue everybody faces. Marcos, you were involved in this program, Shanghai renovation program. Would like to listen to you now.
Well, as a matter of fact, we're working in several places in China. One of them is Shanghai. And actually, a lot of the projects we're doing deal with renovation and regeneration. And I think what Xiaopei was talking about is largely areas which are sort of historic. So they date back to a time before Shanghai exploded to a much, much bigger scale. What we're dealing with a lot is areas which have been built from the 1980s on, which are very much kind of resembling a lot of the developments that have been done in the Soviet Union and thereafter. And I think there also something different is happening than what we see in the Russian context. So, and I think it starts actually a bit with semantics. Everybody here talks about renovation. This is not working. Talks about renovation. Basically, kind of using housing stock, building stock, which has been built after the Second World War, especially from the 1950s, according to what I tend to call a sort of econometric model. So trying to optimize production of living space out of a shortage that was there. Now, what I think is interesting, nowadays Moscow is one of the few cities I'm coming to which actually has not an affordability problem in terms of housing prices. It's actually one of the few really big cities in the world where house prices remain rather stable or either are kind of a bit lower than they were a couple of years ago. If you look at Shanghai, if you look at Shenzhen, a couple other cities in China, it's kind of crazy what people actually have to pay for the housing. Can we move this on? But I think that's also where we kind of can take the discussion here in Moscow. So, you're talking about renovation, which essentially says we're basically kind of keeping what is there, we're kind of making it better, we're kind of adding a floor, but we're still following the same kind of model. And this is what this renovation project really is about. I think. And it's happening on a very, very large scale across the whole cities, millions of square meters, pretty much all happening at the same time. I think, to go to the next step and to think about the next level, one should actually probably also start thinking about introducing a different term, which is regeneration, for various reasons. It kind of does not create the impression of like everything stays the same, it's just getting a bit better. But it actually kind of introduces the idea of creating something which is new based on something which is already existing. And I think this is where very much a city like Shanghai and other Chinese cities are busy with. They're not just kind of rolling out the same model as they did in the 80s, 90s and 0 years, but it's actually also the search for creating sort of identity in a place which has been developed rather fast and which is rather generic. So the regeneration is actually also an effort to actually bring a sort of a local identity and actually have a much more diverse mix of different development models. To give you an example, and this is actually going to the city where I teach and the country I live in, the Bijlmermeer in Amsterdam was actually a city, part of the city, which was pretty much developed according to the same paradigm as actually a lot of the districts in the Soviet Union and thereafter have been built. Now, this was a kind of a social problem, and what they did is actually they decided to regenerate the area, which didn't mean like taking buildings down and replacing them with bigger ones, or just doing one or the other infill. Actually, the whole discussion emerged about kind of changing an entire urban fabric, embracing a different urban planning model and embracing a different urban planning paradigm, which actually created a new kind of identity to the place and lifted it out of this sort of generic appearance that you can find in many, many other places. With quite a successful result. It's one of the still affordable but most kind of sought after and also socially much more stable areas of the city. Now it doesn't move anymore. So here you can see a few, still the old blocks, which actually have been renovated, and then actually new pieces of urban fabric have been introduced. And I think that could be also something which should be added to the discussion in the context of Moscow. How can we actually advance the city and actually improve not only the building and the housing stock, but actually also improve the entire city, the functioning of the city, and the public space or semi-private space network. This is also where there's an opportunity to introduce new kinds of models. The renovation, as it's done now, is actually fairly sort of monotypological. It's providing apartments of pretty much one kind of type, and I think there is room to actually come up with new models. This is an example from Berlin, where actually people which want to have their own house, they kind of join forces and they're actually acquiring a plot, and together with an architect become developers in their own right, in a way collectively developing sort of their dream accommodation. That's right in the center of Berlin. I also think that one shouldn't do it, just in a very, very high speed in a very, very short time, but actually allow also for sort of a learning curve. So you're not starting like all projects at the same time, but you're actually starting here, and then you learn from that and you improve it. You kind of adjust your tools. You do the next one, sort of improve it again. So over the course of a couple of years, you're actually gaining a lot of knowledge on how to do it, I think, more successfully, which ultimately also creates a lot more unique character for different areas, because they're not just all built at the same time. They're kind of accommodating the changes which we are seeing in people's lives, in society, in technology, etc., etc. I think one should also talk about think more seriously about actually regeneration in a way that you use the old existing stock, not as sort of in a preservationist manner, because I think a lot of buildings are not necessarily worth preserving in the way they are, but actually as an ingredient to creating something new, this part of the generation. And I think it also includes the rethinking of, what's the role of standards in the development. There is a lot of discussion, and always has been in the Soviet Union and even nowadays, about standards. And I think standards are a good thing, they're establishing a baseline. But I also think it would be worthwhile actually kind of reconsidering whether standards are actually sort of a kind of a limiting factor, or whether standards are actually something which is for the baseline quality, but you can do it differently, which I think, especially when it comes to whether it's renovation or whether it's regeneration, you quickly realize that the standards are kind of becoming a very inflexible tool, because you're dealing with an existing context where you have to adjust to that context. And I think that is something which is also worthwhile considering. I know there is a debate going on about sort of opening them up, and I kind of very much welcome that debate to say standard is there. It's kind of, if you don't go down a different route, then you can actually sort of apply a standard. But you can also do otherwise if you think you actually need to do it, and if you can demonstrate it also works. That's pretty much the British model. So they don't have standards in a sense, but what they call is approved documents, which is actually something which is kind of keeps you on the safe side. So that has a high chance, or that will be approved automatically. But you can also do it differently if the situation requires so. And then you get actually a much more flexible way of dealing with city. And you can actually also find a lot of spots in the city which can actually be developed with custom-made solutions, or not with sort of a standard solution in that context. And I think we participated in that competition, and that was part of the message we wanted to get out. Move away from sort of stamping pieces of city, but actually move a lot more. This whole regeneration, renovation effort should also be about creating unique character for different areas, using their spatial characteristics, the places where the system actually doesn't work, landscape assets, main roads, etc., which can actually create a much more colorful urban fabric. And I think that's also what cities like Shanghai or a couple of other cities in China do quite successfully in their attempt to update and regenerate the city.
Спасибо, Marcus.
Marcus, thank you very much. Sergey, we've heard a lot about the experience from abroad. We heard about reconstruction, regeneration. What can you say about your project? Will you be able to take into account such ideas? Will you be able to create new, comfortable environment? And how is your project of renovation different from projects in different countries? Thank you very much. We analyze the experience from abroad a lot, and we analyze what has been done in Moscow before, what has been done in Russia and other cities. And as Marcus said, he's demonstrated his project and a lot of people around this table, you probably remember other projects in the competition. There were 5 pilot projects under this competition project. Can I change the slides myself? Okay, great. Yes, Moscow has a different type of project. There was an example of Amsterdam and Shanghai, but in Moscow we have some specifics. Here you see the timeline of the construction development. So for some time, we were in line with what was going on in Europe. But then during the Soviet period, the situation got different. And this pink line, downward line, shows this main difference. And it's not only about Moscow, it's also about other cities in Russia. René de Graaf wrote an interesting book, and I was working with this book, writing a preface to it. And actually, during the post-war time, a lot of countries started creating typical solutions for housing, and after that, a lot of countries abandoned such an idea, and the USSR and Western Germany, actually, at the same time. I, by the way, met the person responsible for the construction for housing in Berlin last year, and we talked about renovation. They also had this project. They were renovating houses in Berlin. They actually had to stop the project because it was not profitable. And we compared our experiences. Now, when we analyze the situation in Moscow, we changed different indicators, checked the different indicators, and we came to a conclusion that, of course, the housing stock that we have right now is not very valuable. We shouldn't actually try to save the old houses, but we are not demolishing all the houses. Some of the houses, more than 400 buildings, they are great landmarks. They were created by very interesting architects, and they will be preserved. But we have the big problem not only with the quality of houses themselves, but also with the quality of environment around them. So there are no good delineation between public and private spaces. There is just a monofunction. So there are spaces created specifically for housing. They can't be used in different ways. That's why we need to solve a lot of problems. And so we need to have the same number of square meters. That's not just demolishing and building new houses. We need to do much more around the houses as well, because we are going to build more comfortable houses. Standards have changed, and of course the habits and the way of life is different. Of course, we need to build much better houses. Besides, we propose people expand the amount of square meters that they have if they pay additionally. Besides, we improve engineering services. We improve transport accessibility. Mixed use. There was a special discussion about it at this forum. I think it's very important to have the mixed use spaces. In the Soviet Union, we didn't have it at all. Right now, we need to create the mixed use spaces from scratch. We were working with different companies, not only the company of Marcos, but a lot of different architects are helping us in practice, not only with their designs, but they're helping us with construction on sites. We've done tremendous analytical work. We've compared the situation in Moscow with some other districts in other cities in Europe. We compared Moscow districts with some similar spaces, spaces with similar characteristics. As a result, we've realized we have some common features with such districts, and there are some discrepancies as well. So, for example, for comparison, we used London, Helsinki, Paris, those cities which are traditionally considered to be cities with very good quality of life, cities which are focused on citizens, and it's actually quite fair. Such assessment is reasonable. Here we show things which are common for Russia and other cities, and we've shown some differences too. So, for example, the density is similar to density in other cities. We have, on average, the higher number of floors. The density is similar, but houses are higher, taller. Right now, according to statistics, the average highness of a block of flats is 14 floors. So sometimes in mass media you see much higher figures, but that's not truth. And when the density is lower, we see lower houses in Europe. Yes, there are some requirements which are promoted by some public organizations or the State Duma. Yes, we do have some limitations related to some sanitary, environmental, or fire protection regulations. Accessibility of the playgrounds, for example, they are special requirements. As a result, we have a lot of inertia, which is the heritage from the Soviet Union. I wouldn't say that this is a bad necessarily, but the project is so complex that if the audience wants something, we can, of course, tell that it's good to have not more than 6 floors in a building, yes, and if you build taller houses, it's not so good for you. But we don't want to be populists. The life is much more complex. If we want to achieve such a goal, we will have to abandon some other things which are very important for people. People need insulation. They are used to it. There are some things that Muscovites want, which are probably non-existent in some of the European countries. We need to take into account a colossal number of factors. This is a very difficult project. We have a very extensive statistics, and you see here the first column that's existing situation, second column that's the design, public territory 35%, that's what we want to have, and we want to increase the number of public spaces, because the third column, that's the situation in Europe. We need to develop the network of streets. So you see on top this plan, that's what we have, and this graph down on the slide, that's what we want to have. We want to have much better road connection, road networks. And this is our ideal option. Yes, European cities, it's a good model for copying, I would say, in general. Another slide, it's analytical. I'm not going to discuss it. I hope that I've answered the questions that you had. Sergey, thank you very much. Renovation, it's not just construction. Formula is compound, and there are lots of components, social infrastructure, transport, and engineering infrastructure. My next question is a question to Pier Francesco. So you're a professional in urban planning. What do you think about the Moscow renovation project? What's your assessment?
A very interesting project for us, because it's something that Milan is facing now. To be true, in the recent period, we didn't have a big problem of regeneration inside the city on the housing level, because Milan is not such a big city. We are actually 1.3 million of inhabitants in the inner city, while in the metropolitan area it's 3.5, but we would consider even 5-7 million in less than 1 hour far from the central square of Milan. What happened from the 70s was the fact that in the 70s, in the inner city, there were 1.7 million of inhabitants. So there is a reduction of more than 20% of inhabitants from the 70s to 10 years ago. So the easiest way to regenerate the city was the fact that the people, when probably they came from southern Italy and they stay in the periphery of Milan, when they were a little richer, they go outside the city, because the idea was the fact that you live better close to the city but outside. So we didn't have to do many things from the 80s to the last decade, because it was a normal market solution of the problem. What happened in the last decade is totally different, because probably I have also maybe some images. I don't know if it's available or not. But what happened in the last decade is something different. We stopped decreasing and we go back to go up. While Milan was considered by their inhabitants a bit depressive to live inside, now it's the place to be, especially for young people. And actually Milan has got 300,000 university and post-diploma students. That is one of the 10 biggest university cities in Europe. So now we have to face two new problems that are similar to the one you are facing in Moscow. First, public housing that are still owned by the city is the 10% of the number of flats in Milan. That is a huge number. And okay, they are public, but people inside, they don't pay, more or less. And in they stay 47 years inside. So, okay, it's public, but I would say that it's free private housing at the moment. And of course, they have the same problem that every of you said. They are from the 70s of little before, so they are old buildings. They need big regeneration. And this is one of the two biggest problems. The second problem connected to the building is the fact that you have also to work on people inside the housing. That is another problem, because you have old building with many problems, and who lives inside? Usually old Italian people from one side, and from the other, the last migration people. So you have old Italian people and people from Africa, from Asia, from Southern America. And it's also a cultural mix that is complicated, as it is complicated the fact that you have to regenerate the place. And it is one problem we are facing. The second problem is that you have 10% of building that is for free for who lives there. And the other are on free market. So you don't have actually big solution for the fact that many young people are coming to Milan, and they are full of hope, but not of money, actually. So they need some low-cost solution, and you don't have a solution for people that want to exit public housing, but they can't afford a full rent, or they can't buy a house. So our main policies actually are these two. First, we are investing many millions of euros, at the moment €500 million, to regenerate those buildings. And we are more moving on the idea to regenerate the existing building and to invest in improvement of public space than to demolish and recreate a new solution. That is the way we saw that we can also convince people to trust the change in the moment. But of course, results finally probably are lower than to demolish and to regenerate a building. But we had to decide, and probably it was a way to reduce the starting opposition from the citizens, and that is why we chose that solution. Second, luckily we have other places to regenerate, especially abandoned rayard that is part of the city that has changed in those years, where we are building especially social housing to create this market that is half of the cost of a free market, that helps to not to create too much increase of renting. That is something that is happening, especially in the last 3 years in Milan, and also to give an opportunity to go out from public housing. That are the two main strategies, and I think that what is experimenting Moscow is so interesting, even for the large scale of the regeneration that is happening.
Спасибо, Пиров.
Thank you very much. And now I'd like to address Maxim Reshetnikov. So you're a governor, you're an economist as well. What do you think about the renovation project in general? How do you think it can influence the development of different regions? Moscow is an example. I agree that a lot of regions, they look up to Moscow. They want to possibly copy the project, and a lot of people in my region ask a question whether we are going to have our houses renovated. But unfortunately, in my region, it would be too costly. But at the same time, there is a big national project which is related to building new houses for instead of houses which are in a very dangerous state. And we have similar project in my region. We actually allocated some budget for it even before the start of this national project. After that, we received additional budgeting in the framework of the national project. We decided to have the full-scale project. So sometimes we have 3 or 4 houses which are officially considered to be hazardous because of their state, and some of the houses are more or less okay, but according to the documents, they are not considered to be the subject for renovation. So we need such mechanisms. We do have a lot of problems with old houses. Besides, this project have to be solved not only in big cities, but in some villages and towns too. And here we have the problem of spaces. We have a question whether we are going to build new houses in the same villages and towns, or people should be moved to some more modern towns where there are more jobs, where there are more new plants and factories operating, and this is a big issue. So if it's a small town, do we need to continue building high-rise buildings there? During the Soviet times, we sometimes had a couple of 5-floor buildings, and it was not a very good solution, probably. Maybe we need to use a different model, a modern model. So we have some limitations related to the federal law, but now the Ministry of Construction is going to introduce some amendments in order to create more flexibility for such problems related to old and hazardous buildings. So there are going to be new mechanisms which will help us. There is a lot of demand for such projects, and we would like to use the experience of Moscow. The renovation project, it's not only something related to great opportunities which exist in Moscow and great funds which exist in Moscow. Besides, that's experience of applying new mechanisms.
a separate federal law was adopted providing for slightly different procedures, also urban planning procedures. Traditional procedures provided for a stage-wise change of the master plan and layouts and designs. The changes, as they're reflected in the urban code. So previously it would take 1.5 years for these changes to take place. We had to go through 3 public hearings about the same. Moscow has managed to secure a special mechanism for itself. This mechanism is efficient. It's worthwhile. The question is why not to apply it on a broader scale, change it from a pilot project into a common project. So my message is as follows. We need to take a long, hard look at the Moscow experience. I think it's a successful experience and hard-won experience, and I think it should be applied when it comes to the relocation program, renovation program, and everything related to construction rules and regulations. And given the current rules, no other region would be able to apply these rules because Moscow deviated in its development and some amendments were made. So we need to get back to those solutions in order to increase the flexibility of our legislation. Many aspects need to be revalued, revised, because only flexible legislation would be able to address the challenges we face as part of the national projects. We need to get prepared for the plenary session. I wanted to thank the session, the panelists. It was a very informal, very interesting in terms of approaches, experience, different solutions used. And I think that such multidisciplinary and this discussion of the renovation projects would make it possible for every stakeholder to draw the right conclusions for the benefit of their cities. So I'd like to apologize. I need to leave now. Colleagues, we still have some time left. Next question to Alexei Babashin, CEO of Crossed. We heard that the construction industry should be prepared for these challenges. So what challenges are facing the developers? Do you think there is a strong need for new personnel, for the retraining of the existing personnel? Is there such need? Good afternoon. Engaging with the city is always a very honorable thing. And the Renovation Fund and the Moscow Architectural Committee, as they set the parameters, the broad parameters, they welcome and embrace the broad variety of different landscapes, buildings, streets and roads in accordance, in line with the uniqueness of neighborhoods. So we work in the Baumansky district, and we were told that the upper level is 6, 7, 9 floors, and nobody's giving us any other instructions or orders. It's up to architects. What about the new materials, starting with engineering floors and elevators and overhanging facades? When people are asking, how long will these buildings stay? And people say, for 100 years. And but we don't know what's going to happen in 50 years' time. Maybe there will be pilotless elevators. So we don't know what kind of technologies we will have. So the applications that are being used in Moscow and the supervision of the construction watchdog of the Moscow government, they're making all of the stakeholders, operators, manufacturers, construction companies, make us comply more strictly with the construction rules and regulations. We're talking about better heat insulation and other aspects. We have head of the renovation fund. So his team are very wise, very reasonable. The quality of requirements has increased. We are lagging behind. This calls for retraining, starting from vocational training or vocational counseling, professional counseling at the school level, at the university level. We're currently employing young specialists, and this year we've launched the first crossed engineering centers. There are going to be 3 of them. Why do we need them? People are saying that IT technologies are making a strong headway, and we need to train people with full knowledge of those technologies. But our argument is the variety of building materials, construction materials has moved even further. So we need to increase the engineering technical level of our personnel. That's a must because there is a variety of different technologies, of materials that engineers, construction workers need to be aware of. So we're moving from purely industrial manufacturing area towards R&D. We have now a host of labs, and we need to transition towards manufacturing, construction, and scientific agglomeration. Thank you. We have 5 minutes left. I have a quick question to Alexander Lamakin, Anatoly Konstantinov. As of now, as of 2019, what can we say about the number of houses that are ready for occupation? How many people have been relocated? How many people have taken up dwellings? Just 2 minutes each. Can you hear me? Very briefly, on the occupation process, last year those apartment blocks were commissioned, which had been designed under housing program, not renovation program, but they were modernized, upgraded as a matter of priority. So they were changed to reflect the renovation program. They were made ready for occupation last year. And Q1 this year, more than 40 apartment blocks are in the process of occupation, so residents are moving in. And we believe that by the end of this year, about 20,000 residents will move into new dwellings. Mr. Konstantinov, relocation. Good afternoon, everybody. The thing is that the fund was registered on October 11, 2017. So we're going to celebrate a 2-year anniversary this year. We have far-reaching tasks. The fund itself cannot operate on a standalone basis. A fund is a small element, as a small cogwheel in this complex system. Our job is to design, to build, to commission housing on time and with an appropriate quality. And this task will be met by all means. Thank you. A very optimistic view, everything on the right track. We have 1 minute left. Ilya Kievsky, you were involved in the pre-design works under the renovation program. Your apprehensions, did they come true, dear colleagues? I must say that science is moving forward. Science, analytics are supporting renovations. Back in the 50s, science was developing and was supporting the renovation program. Everything we have now, mathematical modeling, construction work management techniques, all these new technologies and techniques are being applied. At the same time, we have new challenges we need to address. Human factor in our schedules, provide for a systematic work. Sometimes we can't get a building permit on time. In other cases, people don't want to relocate. So we encounter such problems once in a while. So some of the expectations have been fully met. Other challenges, we know how to tackle them. We work in one team, and we're going to gain experience and avoid mistakes in the future. Dear colleagues, our time is up. I wanted to thank our panelists, colleagues, for their experience, for their interesting views that they shared with us. Now I would like to invite you to the plenary session. Thank you.